The March sun shone intensely over the town of Pinewood when Michael Thompson's black car pulled up in front of the traditional amusement park. Through the window, Emily gazed in wonder at the vibrant colors of the old rides that rose against the blue Midwestern sky. Her brown eyes sparkled with curiosity as she clutched her small pink backpack filled with colored pencils and a half-used sketchbook. "Daddy, is this really it? It's so beautiful," exclaimed the 6-year-old girl, bouncing on the back seat. Her colorful unicorn t-shirt contrasted with the somber interior of the executive vehicle. Michael smiled, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. At 42, the Chicago businessman carried the rigid posture of someone who lived constantly under pressure. Even during an extended holiday weekend, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating with urgent messages from the construction company he managed. "Of course, Princess. It's exactly like Lauren said it would be," he replied, impatiently ending yet another call. In the passenger seat, Lauren adjusted her Dior sunglasses and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 35, she possessed a calculated beauty. Impeccably styled blonde hair, perfect makeup even for a casual outing, and expensive clothes that looked like they came from a magazine. She turned to Emily with a smile that didn't warm her eyes. "You're going to love it, sweetheart. It's a very educational place for children," she said, emphasizing the word as if it were a euphemism. Emily nodded enthusiastically, not noticing the coldness in her tone. For her, this was a special day, a rare opportunity to have her father all to herself, away from the office and the endless meetings that always stole his attention. As soon as they set foot in the park, Emily was overcome by a magical feeling. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of cotton candy and caramelized popcorn. A nostalgic melody emanated from strategically positioned speakers, creating a perfect soundtrack for this fairy tale setting. The century-old trees surrounding the area filtered the sunlight, creating a dance of shadows on the cobblestone paths. "Can I go on the carousel first, Dad?" asked Emily, pointing to a colorful ride that slowly rotated in the center of the park. "Sure, but don't wander too far," Michael replied distractedly, already typing a response on his phone. Lauren watched the girl run toward the ride and moved closer to Michael, lightly touching his arm. "Honey, you need to relax. Put that phone away for a few hours," she whispered in his ear, with a seductive voice he knew well. Michael hesitated, but finally put the device in his pocket. Lauren was right. This was a moment to be present with Emily. For weeks she had been asking to do something different, away from the suffocating routine of Chicago. "You're right. Today is Emily's day," he said, intertwining his fingers with hers. The three spent the next hour circling the rides. Emily went up and down the children's roller coaster, threw rings at colorful bottles and savored cotton candy bigger than her head. At each moment, she furiously sketched in her notebook. A red-nosed clown here, a rocking horse there, butterflies dancing among the flower beds. "She has talent for drawing," commented Michael, watching his daughter concentrate on sketching, while sitting on a bench near the carousel. "She's a normal child," Lauren replied indifferently. "All kids draw at that age." Michael frowned, bothered by the comment, but said nothing. In recent months, he had noticed a certain coldness from Lauren toward Emily, but always attributed it to the fact that she didn't have children of her own. Perhaps it was just a matter of time for them to get used to each other. The day passed without major surprises until Emily discovered a more secluded area of the park. There, almost hidden by a curtain of purple wisteria, was an old carousel that clearly hadn't worked in years. Unlike the other modern and colorful rides, this one had a melancholic and majestic air. The hand-carved wood told stories in every detail: flowers, leaves, and animals sculpted with artistic precision. The paint, though faded by time, still revealed golden and red tones that must have been dazzling in their heyday. But what caught Emily's attention most was a white horse positioned at the center of the carousel. Its mane sculpted in perfect waves, and its carved eyes seemed to hold a soul of their own. "What a beautiful horse," Emily murmured to herself, approaching slowly. She sat on the edge of the carousel platform and opened her notebook, determined to capture that beauty in her drawings. For some reason she couldn't explain, she felt strangely connected to this place, as if she had been there before in distant dreams. As she drew, time seemed to stand still. Emily didn't notice that the sounds of the park had diminished, nor that the shadows were beginning to lengthen, announcing the end of the afternoon. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Emily, where are you, sweetheart? Michael's voice echoed through the winding paths of the park as he and Lauren searched for her. The girl raised her eyes from her sketchbook, realizing for the first time that she had wandered farther than she thought. The old carousel was in an almost isolated area, protected by a hedge that separated it from the main bustle of the park. "I'm here, Dad," she shouted, waving from the platform of the deactivated ride. Michael and Lauren approached, and he sighed with relief to see that his daughter was safe. However, Lauren observed the scene with a barely disguised expression of disapproval. "Emily, you can't run off like that without telling us," Michael reprimanded, but without excessive strictness. "We were worried." "Sorry, Daddy. I found this beautiful carousel and wanted to draw the white horse," explained Emily, proudly showing her notebook with the still unfinished sketch. Lauren crossed her arms, irritated by the delay. She had planned this outing as an opportunity to have Michael to herself, away from the paternal responsibilities that always disrupted her plans. Seeing Emily so entertained with those childish rides only reinforced her conviction that the girl was a constant obstacle to the life she wanted to build with Michael. "Honey, why don't we let Emily play here while we take a walk, just the two of us?" Lauren suggested with a honeyed voice, touching Michael's arm. "She's so focused on her drawing, it would be a shame to interrupt." Michael hesitated, looking at his daughter, who had already returned to her intense sketching, completely absorbed in her art. "I don't know, Lauren. She's too young to be left alone." "Michael, darling," Lauren lowered her voice even more, moving closer to him. "You need to learn to trust in her independence. Emily is already 6 years old, not a baby anymore, and look around. This corner is totally safe, isolated, with no strangers passing by." Emily, pretending not to pay attention to the adults' conversation, caught every word. In recent weeks, she had noticed how Lauren always found ways to separate her from her father, always with arguments that sounded reasonable, but left her with a strange feeling in her stomach. "Besides," Lauren continued, "you work so hard. You deserve a few moments to relax, don't you think? Just the two of us talking, enjoying this romantic place." Michael looked again at Emily, who was now intensely coloring the white horse's mane with silver tones. The girl seemed really focused and happy. Maybe Lauren was right. A few minutes of break wouldn't hurt anyone. "All right," he finally yielded, "but just for a few minutes. Emily." The girl looked up with a pink pencil between her teeth. "We're going to take a quick walk around the park, okay? You stay here drawing, but don't leave this spot. Promise?" Emily nodded energetically, although a pang of sadness hit her. Once, again, Lauren managed to have her father all to herself. "I promise, Dad. I'll finish my drawing of the horse." "Good girl," Michael kissed the top of her head. "We'll be back soon." As the two walked away, Emily watched them disappear among the trees. Lauren had linked her arm with Michael's and was saying something in his ear that made him chuckle softly. The girl sighed and turned her attention back to her drawing, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. "At least you're here with me, horsey," she murmured to the wooden figure. And then something extraordinary happened. For an instant, so brief that Emily almost doubted she had seen it, the carved eyes of the white horse seemed to blink. She blinked too, several times, but the animal had returned to its usual immobility. "Was that just my imagination?" she asked quietly, moving even closer to the horse. The wind blew softly, making the wisteria leaves dance and creating a play of light and shadow over the carousel. Emily extended her hand and carefully touched the sculpted neck of the horse. The wood was warm, as if it had been heated by the sun for a long time, but there was something more, a sensation of life pulsing beneath her fingers. "You're special, aren't you?" she whispered, "different from the other rides." At that moment, Michael's phone began to vibrate insistently in the pocket of his jacket, which he had left hanging on a nearby fence when he left with Lauren. Emily looked in the direction of the sound but didn't move to answer it. Her father had asked her to stay exactly where she was. Minutes passed, and Michael and Lauren didn't return. The park slowly began to empty. Emily noticed that some families were already walking toward the exit. Carrying sleepy children and bags of souvenirs, the sky was turning orange, announcing the end of the day. Emily returned to drawing, but now with less enthusiasm. The solitude was beginning to weigh on her, and she wondered where her father might be. Had he forgotten about her? Or had Lauren convinced him to stay away longer? The white horse seemed to observe her with understanding, as if it knew exactly what she was feeling. And perhaps it did understand, thought Emily. After all, they were similar, both abandoned in forgotten corners, waiting for someone to return and give them attention and affection. The sun had completely hidden behind the mountains when Emily finally admitted to herself that something was wrong. For more than 2 hours, she had been drawing alone on the abandoned carousel, with no sign of her father or Lauren. The park was practically empty. Only a few employees circulated in the distance, collecting trash and turning off the lights. On the rides, "Dad!" she called, getting up from the carousel platform and looking around. Her voice echoed through the empty space with no response. "Dad, where are you?" The chill of the night was starting to arrive, and Emily pulled the sleeves of her unicorn t-shirt, trying to warm herself. She put the colored pencils in her small backpack with trembling hands, not from cold, but from a fear that was slowly growing in her small chest. She decided to search the main paths of the park. Perhaps her father was on a distant ride. Or maybe he had lost track of time talking with Lauren. Yes, that must be it. Michael sometimes got distracted when he was with his girlfriend. Emily had already noticed this. She walked by the tracks of the children's roller coaster, passed by the food stalls that were already closing their metal shutters, looked near the modern carousel where they had played in the morning. Nothing. The park was transforming into a completely different place. The colorful and cheerful lights, giving way to a yellowish and sparse illumination, projecting long and strange shadows. "Excuse me?" Emily approached an employee who was sweeping dry leaves near the entrance. "Have you seen my dad? He's tall. He was with a blonde lady." The man stopped sweeping and looked at her with concern. "Alone, little girl. Where are your parents?" They went for a walk and said they'd be back soon," explained Emily, trying to keep her voice steady. "How long ago was that?" Emily didn't know how to answer. She didn't wear a watch and had completely lost track of time while drawing. "It's been quite a while," she admitted quietly. The employee frowned, clearly concerned, but at that moment he was called by another colleague and moved away, promising to return in a few minutes. Emily stood there watching the last visitors leave the park. Entire families walked toward the parking lot, children sleeping in their parents' arms, all seeming to have had a perfect day. Panic began to grow. What if her father had left? What if something had happened to him? What if— "No," she whispered to herself. "Daddy wouldn't leave me here alone. He'll come back." But a small voice in her mind whispered something else. Lauren convinced him. "She always said it would be better without you." With tears beginning to blur her vision, Emily ran back to the old carousel. It was the only place where she felt safe at that moment. She climbed onto the platform and curled up next to the white horse, resting her face against its smooth, cold side. "I'm scared," she confessed to the wooden figure. "I don't know what to do." And then, once again, something impossible happened. Emily felt a gentle breeze caress her hair, as if it were a kind hand trying to console her. She looked around, but there was no wind. The leaves of the trees were motionless in the moonless night. Can you hear me?" she asked softly to the horse. Silence, but a different silence, loaded with presence and attention. Emily extended her hand and touched the animal's neck again. The wood was even warmer now, and she could swear she felt a gentle pulsation, like a heart beating slowly. Her small fingers explored the perfect curves of the sculpted mane, and for a moment she had the sensation that the wooden hair moved at her touch. "You're alone too, aren't you?" she murmured. "Forgotten here with no one to play with you." Never mind. Hours passed slowly. Emily alternated between crying silently and trying to maintain hope that her father would appear at any moment. The park had become a ghostly place. Only a few security lights remained on, creating yellowish circles of visibility amid the darkness. It was when the cold became more intense that Emily noticed something extraordinary. The white horse seemed to emanate a gentle warmth, as if a source of energy pulsed inside it. She snuggled even closer against it, and had the impression that the animal leaned slightly in her direction, offering shelter. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her eyes and trying to ignore the strange sounds that began to echo through the deserted park. They were noises that shouldn't be there. Rhythmic steps on the wood, metallic creaks as if some rides were still working even after being turned off. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, trying to convince herself that it was just her frightened imagination. But when she opened her eyes again, she was certain that the white horse had moved. Not much, just a few inches, but enough for her to be positioned exactly between it and the mysterious sounds coming from the darkness. "You're protecting me," she realized, with more admiration than fear. And for the first time since realizing she was alone, Emily smiled. She wasn't really abandoned. She had a guardian, silent and magical but real, a friend who would never leave her behind, unlike certain people she knew. While Emily nestled beside the white horse, 15 miles away, Michael was parking his car in front of the 5-star hotel where they were staying. Lauren got out of the vehicle with calculated elegance, fixing her hair and checking her makeup in the side mirror. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Michael asked for the 3rd time, his voice tense with nervousness. "Honey, we've already talked about this." Lauren touched his face with feigned delicacy. "Emily is a smart girl. She'll seek help, someone will find her, and everything will naturally resolve itself. Sometimes situations resolve themselves without us having to carry unnecessary burdens." The word burdens echoed in Michael's mind like a punch to the stomach. Was that how Lauren saw his daughter? As a weight he carried? But what if something goes wrong? What if she gets hurt? Lauren sighed with theatrical impatience. "Michael, darling, you need to think about our future. You're a successful man with the potential to be even more prosperous. I can help you get where you deserve to be, but I can't constantly compete with a child who absorbs all your energy, time, and financial resources." Michael knew he should feel horror at those words, but for months, Lauren had been planting these seeds in his mind. She talked about freedom, about trips they could take, businesses they could explore, a life of luxury without the responsibilities of raising a child alone. And he, tired of the pressures of single parenthood since separating from his ex-wife, had begun to listen. "Let's go to the room," said Lauren, linking her arm with his. "In a few hours, we'll go to the police station to report that Emily got lost. We'll say she wandered off during the outing and, despite looking for hours, we couldn't find her. What if they discover we didn't look? Who's going to discover? There were no cameras in the area where we left her, and our version will be consistent: desperate parents who lost their daughter in a moment of distraction." In the deserted park, Emily woke up to the sound of her own labored breathing. She had dozed off leaning against the horse, and now the night was at its peak. The cold cut like blades, and she trembled violently, hugging herself to try to stay warm. But something strange was happening. The white horse was radiating a gentle and constant warmth, as if an invisible fireplace heated its wooden body. Emily leaned against it even more, grateful for the unexpected protection. "How do you do that?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from cold and thirst. There was no verbal response, but she felt a comforting presence, as if the animal was saying, "I'm here. You're not alone." During the night, strange sounds continued to echo through the park. Footsteps on the carousel's wood, creaking chains, music box playing in the distance. Emily kept her eyes closed, but she noticed that whenever the noises came too close, the horse moved slightly, positioning itself as a shield between her and whatever was producing those sounds. Once, she clearly felt the animal lower its head and touch her forehead with its carved muzzle, in a gesture of protection and affection that made her cry with gratitude. When the sun began to rise, Emily was dehydrated, hungry, and exhausted, but alive. Her clothes were dirty with soil and leaves, her hair disheveled, and she had used almost all the tissues from her backpack to wipe away the tears from the previous night. It was then that she heard footsteps approaching. This time, they were real human footsteps. "Good Lord," exclaimed a deep, concerned voice. "Little girl, what are you doing here?" Emily opened her eyes and saw an elderly man approaching. He was short and thin, with messy white hair and simple work clothes. His blue eyes conveyed genuine kindness and concern. My dad," Emily tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. The man knelt beside her, immediately, noticing her weakened state. "I'm Walter. I've worked here at the park for many years. What's your name?" "Emily," she answered in a weak voice. "Emily, how long have you been here alone?" "Since yesterday afternoon. My dad went for a walk with his girlfriend and said he'd be back soon, but..." Walter felt his stomach turn. In 40 years working at that park, he had seen many things, but never a child abandoned for an entire night. "It's okay, child. You're safe now." He looked around and noticed something that made him frown. "You spent the whole night here on this carousel." Emily nodded. "And weren't you cold? The temperature dropped below 50 degrees last night." Emily looked at the white horse, which now seemed just an immobile piece of carved wood. "The horse kept me warm," she said simply. Walter followed the girl's gaze and examined the old ride. He knew that carousel better than anyone. He had helped build it decades ago, and he knew that something very special had happened there that night. On the wood around the base of the carousel, strange marks caught his attention. They were impressions that looked like horse hooves, as if the animal had actually walked in circles around the girl during the night. Walter looked at Emily, then at the horse, and made a decision that would change both their lives. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Walter carried Emily in his arms to his small house at the back of the park, built decades ago when employees were still allowed to live on the premises. The simple wooden and brick construction contrasted with the grandeur of the rides, but it had something they didn't possess: the warmth of a real home. "Let's take care of you first, then we'll talk," he said with a paternal voice, placing Emily on the worn couch in the living room. The girl was visibly dehydrated and in a state of shock. Walter prepared a sweet warm tea, brought homemade cookies, and covered her with a crocheted blanket that his late wife had made years ago. "Drink slowly, little one," he advised, sitting beside her. "Now tell me exactly what happened." As Emily regained her strength, Walter observed every detail of her story. The girl spoke with a pure sincerity that broke his heart. How her father had promised to return soon, how his girlfriend always found ways to separate them, how she spent the night alone on the carousel. "And the horse protected me," she repeated, for the third time, her eyes shining with gratitude. "It moved to keep me warm and safe." Walter nodded thoughtfully. He knew every inch of that park, every story, every legend. The old carousel did have something special. It had been built by an Italian craftsman at the beginning of the last century, and there had always been rumors about its unique nature. Some children had reported similar experiences, but never in such dramatic circumstances. Meanwhile, at the Pinewood police station, Michael and Lauren were playing the role of desperate parents with an almost perfect performance. "It all happened so fast, officer," Michael was saying to Sergeant Davis, an experienced 50-year-old man who had seen all kinds of situations. "Emily was playing in the park. We stepped away for a few minutes to buy a snack, and when we came back, she had disappeared." Lauren held a handkerchief to her eyes, simulating tears that wouldn't come. "We looked for hours," she added with a choked voice. "We called her name, asked for help from other visitors, searched every corner of the park, nothing." Sergeant Davis took notes, but something in the story wasn't completely convincing him. In his 25 years of police career, he had developed a keen instinct for detecting inconsistencies. "At what time exactly did you notice the disappearance?" Michael and Lauren exchanged a quick glance. "Around 4 in the afternoon," Michael answered. "And you remained in the park until what time looking for her?" "Until 8 when it closed," Lauren said quickly. "I see." The sergeant made a few more notes. And at no point did you think to notify park security or call the police during those 4 hours of searching? Another glance exchanged between the two. This time the nervousness was more visible. We were very nervous, stammered Michael. We thought she would appear at any moment. Of course. The sergeant didn't seem convinced. We'll start the search immediately. I need a physical description of the girl. The clothes she was wearing, places you frequently visit. As they provided the data, Michael felt a knot growing in his stomach. Guilt was beginning to eat away at him from the inside, mixed with a growing certainty that he had committed the biggest mistake of his life. Back at Walter's house, Emily finished her second cup of tea and was feeling much better. The old employee had turned on the heater and put on soft music, creating a welcoming environment that she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Mr. Walter," she said timidly, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, dear. Do you believe that toys can be magical?" Walter smiled tenderly. That question confirmed his suspicions. "You know, Emily, I've worked in this park for almost 40 years. I've seen many things I couldn't explain to adults. But one thing I've learned, when something protects us and takes care of us, it doesn't matter if we understand how it works. What matters is that we're safe." Emily nodded vigorously. Finally, someone who understood her. "So the horse really did save me?" "I have no doubt about that, little one." Walter stood up and went to the window that overlooked the carousel. Even from a distance, he could see the marks on the ground that he had discovered that morning. Marks of hooves that shouldn't exist, but that were incontestable evidence that something extraordinary had happened that night. "Emily," he said, returning to her side, "I need to take you to the police station so they can officially find you. But I want you to know that, whatever happens, you'll always have a friend here." The girl held the rough hand of the elderly man with gratitude. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Walter, and thank you for believing me." He squeezed her small hand between his. "It was your magical horse that saved you, child. I just showed up at the right time." As they prepared to leave, neither of them imagined that their trip to the police station would reveal much more than just Emily's whereabouts. The carefully constructed lies by Michael and Lauren were about to collapse like a house of cards. The Pinewood police station was in an uproar when Walter arrived with Emily by the hand. 3 patrol cars had been dispatched for the search, and Sergeant Davis was coordinating the operation with the efficiency of someone who took cases of missing children very seriously. "Sergeant," Walter called from the entrance, "I found the girl you're looking for." The movement in the police station instantly stopped. Michael, who was sitting in a chair next to Lauren, jumped up when he saw Emily. For a moment his face showed genuine relief, but Lauren remained motionless, with a carefully neutral expression. "Emily!" Michael approached his daughter, but she instinctively shrank behind Walter. Sergeant Davis observed this reaction with professional interest. In missing person cases, it was natural for children to run to their parents as soon as they saw them. "Where did you find her?" the sergeant asked Walter. "In the park, sir. She spent the whole night alone, leaning against the old carousel in the isolated area." "The whole night?" The sergeant looked directly at Michael. "I thought you said she disappeared yesterday at 4 in the afternoon. It's true," stammered Michael. "We searched until the park closed at 8. But you didn't find a 6-year-old child in an isolated area during 4 hours of searching?" Lauren intervened quickly. "We already looked in that area. She wasn't there when we passed by." Walter frowned. "With all due respect, ma'am, that's not possible. Emily told me she's been in that location since she was left alone yesterday afternoon. And from the state in which I found her, dehydrated, dirty, clearly having spent the night outdoors, there's no doubt that she remained there the whole time." Sergeant Davis approached Emily with gentleness. "Emily, can you tell me what happened yesterday?" The girl looked at Walter, who nodded encouragingly. "I was drawing on the pretty carousel," she began, in a low but firm voice. "Daddy said he was going to take a short walk with Lauren and would be back soon, but he didn't come back." "What time did this happen?" "I don't know the time, but the sun was still very high." "And what did you do when you realized they weren't coming back?" "I searched the whole park. I called for Daddy, asked a man who was sweeping leaves, but I couldn't find anyone." Emily looked directly at her father. I was afraid you had left without me." Michael felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. His daughter's innocent words were more painful than any accusation. "Emily, sweetheart," Lauren tried a sweet approach. "You must be confused. We looked for you for hours. You must have hidden so well that we couldn't see you." But Emily shook her head with determination. "I didn't hide. I stayed at the carousel the whole time like Daddy told me to. And you didn't come back to get me." Sergeant Davis asked Emily a few more questions, and each answer made the inconsistency between her version and the couple's more evident. The girl described in precise detail where she had looked. For the two, the employees she had spoken with, even the exact moment when the park had begun to close. "Sergeant," said Walter, "I need to show you something important." He took his phone from his pocket and showed photos he had taken that morning. These are marks found around the carousel where Emily spent the night. Notice the shape. They're impressions of horse hooves in the damp earth. Michael and Lauren looked at the photos without understanding the relevance, but the sergeant paid special attention. "What does this mean?" "Emily told me that the carousel horse protected her during the night. At first, I thought it was just a scared child's imagination, but these marks... Well, there are no real horses in the park, Sergeant, and these impressions exactly surround the spot where she was." Emily became animated when she saw Walter showing the photos. "It's true. The horse kept me warm all night and protected me. It moved several times to stay between me and the strange noises." Sergeant Davis was a practical man, but he had also seen unexplainable things in his career. What impressed him most wasn't the girl's fantastic story, but the absolute coherence of her account, in contrast to the constantly changing versions. "By the adults. Mr. Thompson," he said formally, "I'd like you and Ms. Lauren to accompany me for a more detailed conversation about yesterday's events." Michael went pale. Lauren maintained her composure, but a vein had popped out on her forehead. "Sergeant, I don't understand why we're being treated as suspects," she protested. "We're the victims here. Our daughter disappeared." "She's not our daughter," Emily spoke softly, but everyone heard. "Lauren always says it would be better if I didn't exist." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked at Lauren with growing horror, beginning to realize the dimension of what he had done. Lauren, for her part, finally lost her cold composure. "This is ridiculous. The girl is making things up, traumatized by what she went through." But Sergeant Davis had already seen enough. The contradictions, the child's behavior, the physical evidence, and now this revelation about the family dynamics. Everything pointed to a disturbing conclusion. "Mr. Thompson, Ms. Lauren, you are being detained for questioning. We have reason to believe that this child's disappearance was not accidental." As the two were led to separate rooms, Emily clung to Walter's hand. "Can I stay with you?" she asked, with tears in her eyes. Walter squeezed her small hand with paternal tenderness. "We'll see what we can do, little one. But I promise you one thing, you'll never be alone again." In the interrogation room, Michael was falling apart. Separated from Lauren for the first time since the beginning of the farce, he faced alone the weight of his own actions. Sergeant Davis sat across from him with a grave expression that left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. "Michael, I'm going to be direct with you," said the sergeant. "Your daughter spent an entire night abandoned in a park, cold, hungry, and thirsty. A 6-year-old child. Meanwhile, you were comfortably in your hotel." I didn't want it to be like this," murmured Michael with trembling hands. "The idea was for someone to find her quickly, for her to be taken care of by the park staff until... Until what, Michael?" "Until she was directed to a suitable home." The words came out as an ashamed whisper. The sergeant leaned forward. "Are you telling me that you purposely abandoned your own daughter?" Michael buried his face in his hands. Months of psychological manipulation from Lauren had convinced him that Emily was an obstacle to his happiness. But now, away from her influence, reality hit him like an avalanche. Lauren said that it would be better for everyone. That Emily would deserve a family that could give her full attention, and that we deserved a life without the responsibilities of parenthood. Michael raised his bloodshot eyes. She said it was an act of love. And you believed that? I was exhausted. Sergeant, raising a child alone, working 16 hours a day, never having time for myself, Lauren painted a picture of freedom that seemed tempting. In the next room, Lauren maintained a completely different posture. Sitting upright with her legs elegantly crossed, she faced the investigator responsible for her interrogation without showing any remorse. I don't see why I'm being treated as a criminal, she said coldly. Michael is the girl's father. If he made a decision about her future, I merely supported him. Ms. Lauren, a child was abandoned. That's a crime. The child is alive and well. She was found, wasn't she? Perhaps this was even beneficial for her, a lesson in independence. The investigator observed her with disbelief. In 20 years of career, he had rarely encountered someone so devoid of empathy. The girl spent an entire night alone, terrified, in an extremely risky situation. How can you call that beneficial? Children are more resilient than we think. Emily is an intelligent girl. She certainly learned something valuable about fending for herself. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Emily was sitting next to Walter, drawing in a new notebook that he had bought for her. The girl seemed calmer, but still startled when she heard loud voices coming from the interrogation rooms. Mr. Walter, she said softly, why doesn't Lauren like me? Walter sighed, looking for adequate words to explain such a complex situation to a child. Sometimes, little one, some people can only think about themselves. It's not your fault. You're a wonderful, intelligent and caring girl. The problem isn't with you. But my dad, he didn't want me either. The question broke the old man's heart. He had witnessed Michael's complete breakdown at the police station, had seen a man realizing too late the size of the mistake he had made. Your dad is very confused, Emily. Sometimes adults make wrong decisions when they're lost. But that doesn't mean you aren't loved. Emily nodded, returning to her drawing. This time she was portraying the carousel with the white horse, but now there was a paternal figure beside it, an elderly man with white hair who was smiling at her. Mr. Walter? Yes, dear. If my dad can't stay with me, can I live with you? Walter felt his eyes well up. 10 years after losing his wife, without children of his own, this brave little girl had come into his life like an unexpected gift. I would love to have you with me, Emily, but these decisions are complicated for adults. But do you really want me, not as a burden? My little one, you would be the greatest blessing of my life. At that moment, Michael came out of the interrogation room with his face devastated by tears. He saw Emily sitting with Walter and approached slowly, as if afraid of frightening. Hello, Emily. She looked up from her drawing but didn't run to him as she used to do. Dad? Michael knelt beside his daughter's chair, trying to find words for the unforgivable. Princess, I made the biggest mistake of my life. There's no excuse for what I did. You are the most important thing in the world to me, and I let someone convince me otherwise. Emily observed him with the serious eyes of someone who had matured years in a single night. Why did you leave me alone, Dad? Because I was weak and stupid, because I listened to lies about you being a burden in my life, when in fact you are everything that gives my life meaning. Tears streamed down Michael's face as he continued. I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if you don't want to live with me anymore. But I want you to know that I spent the whole night regretting it, thinking about you, afraid that something terrible had happened. Emily remained silent for a long moment, processing the words. Dad, when I was scared in the park, do you know what I wanted most? What, Princess? For you to come back. Even knowing that you had left me there, I still wanted you to come back and get me. Michael began to sob openly, crushed by the unconditional love of his daughter that he didn't deserve. I would come. Back 1,000 times if I could, Emily. If they give me a second chance, I swear I'll never disappoint you again. Walter observed the scene with a heavy heart. He could see that Michael was genuinely remorseful, but he also knew that some wounds would take a long time to heal. Michael, he said gently, regardless of what happens now, you need to know that Emily is an extraordinary girl. She went through a terrible situation and showed incredible courage. Michael looked at Walter with deep gratitude. Thank you for taking care of her. Thank you for being the father I should have been. At that moment, the fate of everyone began to take shape, but one thing was clear. Emily would never again be without someone who truly loved her by her side. 3 months had passed since that fateful night in the park. Walter's small house had been transformed into a real home, with Emily's drawings adorning the walls, toys scattered around the living room, and the constant aroma of homemade cookies in the air. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing homework from the new school where she had enrolled. Her notes were organized in colorful notebooks, and beside her a cup of hot chocolate steamed gently. "Mr. Walter," she called, holding up a sheet of paper, "I solved all the math problems by myself." The old man, who was fixing a broken toy at the counter, smiled with paternal pride. "I knew you could do it, my smart little one. You're getting cleverer every day." Emily's transformation in the last few months had been remarkable. The shy and insecure girl had given way to a confident child who laughed loudly, made many friends at school, and demonstrated impressive emotional maturity for her age. The trauma of the night abandoned in the park hadn't completely disappeared, but with love, patience, and proper therapy, she had managed to process the experience in a healthy way. The phone rang, interrupting the peaceful afternoon. "Hello?" Walter answered. "Walter, it's Mr. Jenkins," said the voice of the lawyer who had helped with all the legal process. "I have good news. The judge has just signed the final adoption papers. Emily is officially your daughter." Walter felt his eyes well up with emotion. At 70 years old, he never imagined he would still have the opportunity to be a father. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for everything." Emily, noticing the emotion on the face of the man who had become her refuge, approached concerned. "What? Is it, Daddy?" she asked. She had naturally started calling him that a few weeks ago. "Nothing serious, my child. Actually, it's wonderful news. We are officially a family now." Emily jumped into Walter's lap, hugging him tightly. "Really? Forever?" "Forever and beyond," he confirmed, kissing the top of the girl's head. Michael had gone through a complex judicial process. Besides losing custody of Emily, he was sentenced to community service and mandatory psychological counseling. More painful than any legal punishment, however, was facing the emotional consequences of his actions. In the first months after the incident, Emily had refused to see him. Therapy had helped her understand that having conflicted feelings about her father was normal, and that she didn't need to forgive before she was ready. Lauren, on the other hand, showed a complete lack of remorse throughout the process. She was convicted of child abandonment and conspiracy, serving her sentence in a semi-open regime. She never contacted Michael or Emily again. On a Saturday afternoon, Walter and Emily were at the park, which had now become a place of joy, again for her. The old carousel had been restored and was working again, becoming the most popular attraction among the children. "Can I ride the white horse?" asked Emily, pointing to the ride that had once saved her. "Of course you can, daughter." Emily climbed onto the carousel and went directly to the special horse. When she sat on its carved wooden saddle, she had the same sensation of protection and affection that she had experienced that terrible night. But now, instead of fear, she felt profound gratitude. "Thank you for protecting me," she whispered to the horse, caressing its sculpted mane. As the carousel slowly rotated, Emily waved to Walter, who was watching her with a radiant smile. Other parents were doing the same with their children, and she felt part of that normal and safe world she'd always longed for. It was then that she saw Michael approaching hesitantly. It had been 2 months since she had agreed to meet him occasionally, always in Walter's presence and always for short periods. "Hello, Emily," said Michael when the carousel stopped. "Hi, Dad," she replied, getting down from the horse but maintaining a respectful distance. Michael had changed a lot. He was thinner, with grey hair that hadn't been there before, and his eyes carried a permanent sadness that spoke of deep regret. "How are you?" "Good. I learned to ride a bike, and Daddy Walter said that when I turn 7 we're going to travel to see the ocean." Michael smiled, but with melancholy. Hearing Emily call another man Daddy still hurt, but he knew he had no right to that title. That's wonderful, Princess. You always wanted to see the ocean. It's true. Emily hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Are you okay?" The simple and sincere question almost made Michael cry in front of her. "I'm trying to be a better person, Emily, for you and for myself." "I know," she said, with a wisdom she shouldn't have at 6 years old. "The psychologist lady explained to me that sometimes adults also need to learn and grow." They talked for a few more minutes before Michael said goodbye. When he walked away, Emily returned to Walter. "Daddy, do you think one day I'll be able to completely forgive my biological father?" Walter knelt to be at her height. "Forgiveness isn't something we force, my child. It's something that happens naturally when we're ready, and there's no rush." "But I feel like he's really sorry." "And that's already a beginning. The important thing is that you're safe, loved, and have all the time in the world to decide how you feel." Emily nodded, satisfied with the answer. She looked once more at the carousel, where the white horse observed her with its carved eyes full of history. "You know what's funniest, Daddy?" "What?" "That terrible night brought me to you. If it hadn't happened, I would never have met my real father." Walter hugged her tenderly, thinking about how mysterious the paths of life were. An abandoned child, a magical carousel, a lonely old man, all connected by an invisible thread that had led them to form an unlikely but profoundly true family. When the sun began to set over Pinewood, father and daughter walked hand in hand toward home, leaving behind not just the park but also the painful past. Ahead, there was only love, security, and the promise of many new drawings adorning the walls of their home. And on the carousel that continued to rotate gently in the wind, the white horse seemed to nod in approval, knowing that its little protégé was finally where she always deserved to be, in the arms of someone who loved her unconditionally. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from.